to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
Well, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta. I am the Quiet Warrior. I'm excited to have on the show today Judy Robinett. Judy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here, Tom.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, Judy, and just, you're down there in Idaho and I'm up here on the west coast of Canada. We're just chatting offline, so it's great to have you on the show. I want to start off, and this is really about you, Judy. So I want to ask you to tell us a bit about yourself.
So if anybody saw the movie Napoleon Dynamite, that's where I live in Idaho. I have an extensive background in kind of the corporate world and then happened to read an article on how to become financially successful. And it said there were 5 ways to be a doctor, a lawyer, inherited, or marry it. And I thought those are out. And the 5th one was start a business. And I thought, how hard could it be? And so I started a franchise restaurant and almost went bankrupt. That's one of the stories we can go into. But that led me into the world of entrepreneurs. So I've been an investor. I sit on VC boards and angel investing organizations and have written 2 books with the goal to really demystify the funding process so people can get funded. And my first one was on how to be a power connector.
Well, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I'm already feeling like we're connected in so many ways. I want to just build you up a bit. I like to say, Judy, that the people on my show are egoless, and you certainly are authentic. But I do want to tell people more about your background from your bio. So, there's one line that stood out for me, the woman with the Titanium Rolodex. When I read that, I went, okay, wait a minute. Did that say Rolex watch? No, she said Rolodex. Yeah. And I thought, you know what? Just meeting somebody like Judy and hearing you is probably a gift to many people. But further, that your network extends beyond CEOs, investors, and venture capitalists, TED speakers, and much, much more. So I know we'll get into that. You talked about your diverse career. That'll probably come through the threads in your story. But what I really hooked onto is after 20 years, you realized that there was a bit of a gap in funding, that many of the businesses that you met, or perhaps your own experience, ran into this wall. And so you did something about it. You turned, I guess, your experiences into some type of a purpose. You mentioned a couple books. We'll get into that. And one of the things I want to just plant a seed with you before we get into your story is, as I was reading your bio, I was thinking about one thing, because I'm a businessman. I've started a company. I know how hard it is. I've seen failure in some of the people I work with. And I started discovering a while ago the psychology behind money and the relationship people have with money in their gut. And that, as I've learned, that there may be files that are planted in us because of our backgrounds. Maybe our parents were in the Depression, or maybe we have a bad relationship with money. And sometimes it's access to money, but it's also what's holding us back in ourselves about believing in our idea or a business, or believing that we're worthy of money. And so I want to suggest that, being an educator, you have a BA in psychology. I'm going to try to tap into that knowledge in your story as well.
Absolutely.
So let's turn it to you. I mean, let's get you into your story. Take us back as far as you want to go. Where did this all start?
Oh my gosh. So my dad, like yours, was in the military. And when he retired, we moved to my mother's hometown, a little town of 800 people.
Yeah.
I didn't really fit in. I was bullied and ended up being quite shy as a kid. And then, I went to college, went to work for a couple of Fortune 50 companies. And research shows if you've been raised lower to middle class, you're taught, get a degree, work hard, don't ask for help, people will notice. And I quickly figured out people didn't notice. And I figured out that there was this underlying power structure in companies that didn't often parallel the org chart. So I got the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and got out of my shell a little bit and started figuring out how to quickly add value. When I met strangers, I even made it a game. I was once at a restaurant and I said to the person I was with, whoever pulls up in that parking spot, I'm going to figure out how to talk to them. Well, I looked and they had Idaho plates. So I jumped out and I said, oh my gosh, I grew up in Idaho. Where are you from? And I made it a game. So I've gone from being, pretty shy, didn't think anybody would want to hear anything I had to say, to the total opposite. And then I was, I did my first company, ended up turning it around, selling it after, visiting with a bankruptcy attorney, just terrified, I must tell you, Tom. And he looked at the financials and he said, "You're not even close." And I said, "But I'm broke." And he said something really life-changing to me. And that is, they can break you, but they can't eat you.
Wow.
And that piece of advice has really helped me kick fear to the curb, and take more risks. And so I ended up, being CEO of a public company for about 10 years, and then was introduced to a small startup nobody had heard of in Park City called Skull Candy. The founder had been bankrupt 3 times. He had no books. I helped him with get some advisory board members so he could have credibility, mitigate risk as viewed by the investors. And he went public 2 years ago for just under $500 million. So I became really enamored with the startup world, became an investor, sit on boards. But, at my core, it's helping people, being generous, adding value, and trying to make the world a better place. And Clayton Christensen of Harvard has a new book out called The Prosperity Paradox. And he talks about how many trillions of dollars have been spent in countries, and they're now worse off than they were before, that instead of top down, it takes bottom up entrepreneurs. So that's really my focus. And along the way, I figured out that strategic networking could get you anywhere you needed to go. So there's literally no lack of resources in the world, 269 trillion of private global wealth, information doubling all the time, so many ideas you couldn't even count them, but most people were in the wrong room. And so my first work was to really maximize, teach people how to be a strategic networker. And I hate the word networker. I think it's, icky and manipulative. I didn't like it. But I know nothing happens without people.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you catch your breath. I mean, I've been making notes madly in my mind. You've been sending me on a journey in so many different directions, Judy, which is what I love about you. I mean, you're so diverse in your experience. A couple of things stood out for me, and I'm just going to, play this back to you, and then we'll keep going. And one of them was, I wrote down here, Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, you mentioned this thing about go to school, get a good job. And, that's what we were all taught. That's what my parents taught me. And then, of course, you discovered a different path. And I remember reading some of Kiyosaki's work on the cash flow quadrant, that there's only 2 ways to achieve really independent wealth. And one is starting your own business. But it's so hard to do, as you rightfully said. The second one, which stood out for me, and you got my heart on this, I mean, I honored the fact that your dad was a military man. My father passed away a year ago. He was in the British forces, and as we came to Canada, became a commanding officer here. But the threat of being bullied and shy, I mean, I'm just blown away by you just because of that one thing you said. First of all, it's vulnerable to say it nationally on a show, and thank you for doing that. But secondly, that they say that, the strength within us is also the challenges. I'm an advocate for eradicating bullying with love. I do a lot of work in that area. I relate to it. But what impresses me is that you are shy, and yet you now are this woman with the Titanium Rolodex. And as we hear your story unfold, it's like, okay, every shy person out there listening, you better listen to Judy because she's certainly cracked the code. I mean, the psychology behind uncracking your own code is something I think that is a teaching moment in the show. So now that I've said all that, I want to get you back into your story. So there you were, and you had this you sort of dance with bankruptcy. They said, you can break, but they can't eat you. Kick that fear to the curb, and then you started taking risks. I love the Skull Candy, example, as I think I bought some products from them, and now I know where the greatness behind that company in part comes from. So there you are, and you're on this cusp, and so tell us about, how did you take all that and turn it into the gift that you're giving back to entrepreneurs, in particular the book Crack the Funding Code, how investors think and what they need to hear to fund your startup. Tell us some of the secrets and things within that body of work.
So, so probably the biggest secret is, Einstein, one of my favorite quotes by him is, if you're going to play the game, you better know the rules. And so the VC, angel investing, family office can be pretty opaque. And after being in it as the CEO of the public company, I raised, I think, $8 million, and it was a turnaround. So the company I was asked to be the CEO of was delisted.
Yeah.
They were broke and they were in litigation. And so I raised money kind of under horrid ways, and then I started helping other people. And I saw kind of the same movie, just different actors, and really became adept at helping people raise money. And I finally decided that I need to make it into a book after teaching hundreds of people, the same kind of method. So number one, to set yourself apart as a high potential startup, you need to be really clear on your exit and have comparables. So the investor is pretty clear on how they're going to get their money back. A lot of people say to me, well, do I have to sell the company? And I say, yes, they want their money back and an ROI. And then the second part is mitigate risk as viewed by the investor. So often founders are so enamored with their great product that they forget what the investors are looking for is you to build a successful company. And you mitigate risk. One of the things I love to do is really put the biggest, nicest bow on the package I can. So if someone comes to me with a good product and they've got their value proposition, I'll say, let's add a couple of high-powered board members, advisory board members. So it will add credibility to you as a founder. You may never have started a company before. And so I have friends that are directors at Microsoft. I know the past CFO of PayPal. I've been successful in putting some of those people onto some of the startups, and it just adds, 10 times the credibility to help get you ahead.
Yeah.
And then the other key part is you've got to have a solid pitch deck of only 10 to 12 slides with a kind of profound story of why you're doing this. And you need pro formas, and those pro formas need to be developed by someone who has startup expertise in finance, not your Uncle Bill or the accountant down the street. So you get the right package, and then you position yourself. And I tell people you can create luck by how you position yourself. And people will say, no, you can't. And I'll say, really? Go stand on a train track. Tell me what happens.
Yeah.
Bad luck. So those are kind of the keys. And I kind of unravel about family offices who now invest equally to VCs. And we now have corporate VCs. There's more of them than regular VCs. And there's 300 angel groups across the United States. There's no lack of money out there. And so just understanding a few facts really can make you quicker to get funded. And the key one is investors must know you, like you, and trust you before they'll fund you.
Wow. I mean, I just wrote those words down in my mind, know you, like you, and trust you. So there's so much you're giving us here. I want to go back to that words or sentence about strategic networking. I agree with you. The networking word sounds kind of yucky sometimes, and that maybe is depending on how we think about it. But it is what it is. And I was thinking about these people you're putting on, boards, advisory boards. You said people from the Microsoft, they all these big names, and I'm thinking, wow, there's Judy coming from Idaho, and she's got connection to these people. How does all that happen? How do people do that? Give us just a little bit, paint a picture of what strategic networking looks like. How did you build that Rolodex?
So, I was so shy. I had to read that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And, I found out people liked me. So you talked about being shy. There's half of the people in the world say they're shy.
Yeah.
But if a psychiatrist who's done research will tell you it's only 12%. So it really comes down to your self-worth. And, I didn't think why would anybody want to talk to me? I mean, I didn't know anybody of wealth. But I quickly found out that your problem is somebody else's solution. And if you're alive on this planet, you need help. You need resources. And so, for instance, last year at Pebble Beach, I got introduced to a billionaire VC. And I went up to him and I said, what do you need help with? And he said, I've got this AI conference, artificial intelligence conference coming up, and I need a couple of key speakers. And I said, happy to help. So I've learned that everybody alive needs help somewhere, and that I can help them with the resources by adding value. So for me, strategic networking is being clear on what you need, and then figuring out what resources, and then who would most likely have those resources, and then how can you get to meet them. And I also, find the word kind of disgusting, networking, because often it means using people. You show up at a room and 500 people rush you with their business card. But mine is really based on relationships that are caring and based on generosity. And so that's what I did. I started just slowly trying to add value, helping people. And then, pretty soon I was invited to the White House to a FinTech conference. I've been to the Royal Palace in Belgrade for dinner. I've been to places I would have never imagined in my life, Tom. And so I tell people, if I can do it, you can really do it. And part of it is, kicking that fear to the curb. Research shows we only talk to strangers 2% of the time. That's horrid. I mean, if you think about some of important people in your life, often your husband, wife, they at some point were a stranger. And so I teach people, when you talk to a stranger, there's two ways. Number one, a compliment or a question, just like my talking to the guy in the parking lot. Where are you from in Idaho? And a heartfelt compliment. And you find out 95% of the world out there is good people. There is that dark triad of Machiavellian, narcissistic, sociopath, but that's only 5%.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn to share your story and where you're at and what you need. And then ask what I call my two golden questions. What other ideas do you have for me? And who else do you know I should talk to? And that really is the trick of how I've managed to get where I am. Now, it's taken a while. I'm 65. But I've found out through life that most people will help you if you ask. And those questions are easy asks. And you're right about Robert Kiyosaki. I finally figured out at age 38, I was just making everybody else rich.
I'm smiling because I think I've said that to so many people myself. And that was my last CEO job, the last time I was working for somebody else. And I said, I'm going to start my own business. And then I crashed and burned, and I realized how hard it is, and I have to find a different way. And so much you're saying is such a gift. There's so many lessons in that last little part. I want to just mention a couple things. I want to honor you, first of all, about, going back to this part about picking up a book, reading it. You're filling your subconscious mind with seeds and taking care of the weeds of being shy. I think that's amazing. I've met some people, and especially some people who I call red personalities, and I think, a percentage of people in the world fit into that category. They're top leaders, maybe, 25% who just sometimes are arrogant. They say, why I don't want to make time to have coffee with John over there, or, Judy, I don't have a need to talk to Judy. One of the things you touched my heart with, and I learned myself, is that behind Judy is a whole network, second, third degree of people that maybe I need. And the other thing I want to get your comment on this is about visioning. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs, and they have a product or they have a business, but they haven't done a lot of work on the vision. What does the future of the world look like? How is this going, the work you're doing, going to change it? Or when you leave this planet, how will the world look differently because of your work? And they say that if you create a vision and you understand the world of universal intelligence, that maybe, just maybe, you start seeing people who come into your pathway in a different way. All of a sudden, you start seeing Judy as somebody you should make time for, versus in the past, maybe not. So I just wanted to ask for your thoughts on those things.
Okay. So, your first point about, those arrogant know-it-all, and that probably fits in the dark triad. And Oprah says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And trust me, there's enough good people out there that you just say next and find somebody that will have your back and have your future. Life's too long to deal with, fools and people who will be abusive and use you. And then what was the second question on entrepreneurs?
Oh, it was just more about, having a vision for what
yes.
business is, and then that opens up possibilities.
Yeah. So I really believe that we all come to Earth with gifts, and you can do very little by yourself. And when you maximize that gift and you get out there in the game and, maybe get bloodied or whatever, you learn. And I often tell people every time you get a vision, Goliath shows up. Every single time you're going to have problems. I mean, when I was CEO of a company, the people that had funded me called me one day and said, love what you're doing, but I want you to clean up the assets, sell them, and buy a company. And if you do, we'll do this. And if you don't, we'll sue you and say you've committed fraud with every penny. And I honestly was terrified. Now, I was able to do it, but looking back, every one of those experiences, from the franchise restaurant that I thought I was going, bankrupt, it put steel up my spine.
Yeah.
And so I've been more comfortable with saying, Tony Robbins says, next level, next devil, and just saying, how can I use this to grow? And yes, it's painful at the time, but, if I ask you, Tom, where would you be if the worst thing that had ever happened to you didn't happen? It usually isn't in as good of a place as you are now.
Yeah.
And so if you have that mindset, then it really will help you. And I agree. You mentioned about the hero's journey. I loved Campbell. And I think it's important. I know myself that I'm on the right path when things happen with a greater magnitude and more frequently. Now, sometimes I feel like I'm on a fast train. I'm just hanging on. but I've learned to hang on, and I've learned to kind of listen to the universe and the right people show up. You just say yes, and you make sure that you don't say, oh, I can't do that. I mean, I walked around the house when I became CEO of the public company for 3 months going, I cannot be the CEO of a public company. What am I thinking? And I had a fellow that had been a top PR agency that had been in a training film, and he liked acting so well, he decided that he would apply for some parts. But he got turned down the majority of them. And his agent sent him to a character actor, and this guy had him go around the house for 10 minutes twice a day and say out loud, I am perfect for the part. I am perfect for the part. And that cured me. That really has helped me. So last week I was in New York. I was on my first live TV show with Yahoo Finance, and I spent a little time walking around going, I'm perfect for the part.
You're making me smile here, and I know the audience is probably smiling too. I wrote a few words down, steel up my spine. Everybody listen to that, write that down. The days that break you make you, and I totally agree with you. And when you said this thing about the acting, and I thought about the rejection part of it, the Rocky story. I mean, just look at the story of what he did and was turned down so many times. I know one thing that I come across a lot is in leadership or meeting people, and they talk about it with me, which is imposter syndrome. And I love your honesty or vulnerability on that when you say I was the CEO and for 3 months I kept pinching myself. And so this is another show, I think, between you and I, because you really get psychology given your training that it doesn't matter how much money is out there, how many people in the network are there, what kind of a great product you have. If the brain can't think and create when it has a negative thought, and if we walk around saying negative things or having a negative relationship with money or as you said, doubting ourselves, forget about it. So, I mean, there's just so much that you've taught us. I want to, before I turn it back to you as we wind this up, Judy, and we probably have you back again because we got more to talk about. I want to honor you with 4 words. I write these down when I do my show. They're unscripted. They just come out of me when you're talking. The first one is trailblazer. You are a trailblazer. There's no question. You're a connector. You're a visionary, and you're a servant. You've taken your gifts and you're serving others, which is such a great thing. So,
thank you.
You're welcome. So, why don't you tell us about your body of work? You have a great new book out, anything you want, where people can get a hold of you, whether it's for speaking or any work you're doing.
Yeah, so my email is judy@judyrobinett.com with no E on the end of Robinett. I'm on LinkedIn. I do have a website, Judy Robinett, and, happy to connect with people. my new book is Crack the Funding Code. I'm humbled and grateful. It became a #1 international bestseller, Amazon bestseller. And I had to do it, Tom, because I went around the world and I met so many great founders who were struggling, trying to get funded. And I wanted to demystify that process. And my first book is How to Be a Power Connector. And it's really what I've learned for the past 30 years, going from the shy kid to being on panels with Mark Cuban, going to the White House, things I would have never envisioned. So thank you for your kind words.
Well, you're welcome, Judy. And you know what? I love you and your story. There's so much you've taught us here. And as you were saying that about the book, I'm going to recommend everybody get that book, check it out, read it. That book and the first book Judy mentioned should be on your shelf, whether you're a business leader or not, as a go-to reference. Judy, I have friends, actually friends of my wife's. They run a construction company, build very expensive multi-million-dollar homes out here on the west coast of Canada. And they invited me for dinner, and they gave me a pitch deck, something that they're involved in. I looked at the pitch deck, and it has a great idea in it. And the last question was, you might know some people because they're looking at trying to find funding. Well, I'm going to take your book and send it over right away and get them to read it and then talk about that over dinner. So what a great conversation piece that was.
And Tom, you just introduced me. I'm happy to help them. So I have the best pitch deck guy in the world, John Livesey. I have the best guy for Startup Financials, David Meister in New York, and I'm happy to make some connections and provide some guidance.
Well, that's fantastic. I'll also be sending him this show to listen to, and he'll get excited. You're such a giver. So everybody, find this show on iTunes and give it a rating so you can honor Judy's work. Check out her connections and her website. Get those books and develop yourself with some knowledge and live life with passion and find that true purpose that you have. Live the life that you deserve and desire.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca